welcome to Connected Conversations for Creatives, a place where creatives like you can learn, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr. Today, we're going to begin with a question that echoes through the halls of every creative's mind. What is resilience? Resilience is often depicted as this capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, but for creatives, it's so much more. It's about transforming adversity into art. It's the steadfastness that drives us to continue creating even when faced with rejection, criticism, or personal trials. Resilience in creativity isn't just about enduring, it's about using our challenges to fuel, to propel our work to new heights, to deepen our expression, and to connect with our audience more deeply. So, how do we cultivate such resilience? Well, it begins with embracing the full spectrum of our experiences, triumph, testing. It's about recognizing that every creative block, every rough draft, and every setback is an integral part of our journey. With resilience, we don't just survive our creative battles. We emerge stronger and more capable, armed with insights that enrich our art. As creatives, our ability to rebound is complemented by our willingness to reflect on our experiences. This introspective process, it helps us to understand the contours of our creativity. It guides us to greater authenticity in our work. By reflecting, we learn not just to navigate our creative landscapes, but also to reshape them. And here to share with us what it means to be resilient and how it can feed your creativity is Joel David Bond. Joel is an independent creative and seasoned world traveler, and he's bringing with him a wealth of experience from living across different cultures into his art and storytelling. His self-published work, As Large as Your Spirit, which received a top-tier mention in the Best Indie Book Awards, exemplifies his resilient spirit and empathetic approach to writing. His stories aren't just his own. They're a mosaic of the lives and landscapes he's encountered. And I look forward, and I hope you do too, to hearing about how his resilience has elevated not only his work, but his creative experiences as well. So Joel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. That was quite the introduction. I think we could end the show there.
No, we haven't heard from you, and I really want to hear about because I am not a world traveler. I have been to other countries, but it's not something that's a passion of mine, but I love other cultures. I love learning about them and experiencing them through other people because that if they are a world traveler, they're super excited about it and passionate about it. So let's just start with the basics, though. Tell us about yourself and how you found yourself a traveling creative.
Well, I've always been drawn to other cultures, other places, other worlds. You know, growing up, I had these programs that would come into our primary school. Our school district had this guy who his job, I think his full-time job, was to travel every summer. And then during the school year, he'd come in and give presentations to all the schools in the metropolitan area about the place that he'd just spent 2 months living. And I remember, sitting in these presentations as a primary school student and just being absolutely enamored, actually enthralled with the way people lived in these other places and wanting to have a little bit of that for myself. My mother, claims that I was reading National Geographic, out of the womb, basically. She just says, I remember, kindergarten, you'd be sitting there flipping through National Geographic magazines, and I'm sure it was more for the pictures and the text, but I was just always fascinated by the world that is out there, and there's so much to explore. I've always had this desire to see what's around the next corner, and so I think as I grew older and I had more opportunity and capacity to travel independently and to go places and actually do these sorts of things that I dreamt of as a kid, I just went and did it.
I love that. So were you a traveler as a kid? Did y'all go places? Did you do things? Or was this just literally something that you dreamed about doing?
Something I dreamed about doing all the way until my junior year of high school was the first time I actually left the country. Growing up, we didn't have a whole lot of money to take, grand vacations. I remember a couple of camping trips basically in the region here in the Midwest. But, maybe, road trips to Chicago to see the grandparents kind of thing. But, my first time to actually travel overseas was my junior year of high school. And it was an exchange trip, three weeks to France. And I remember just thinking what an absolute dream it was to be able to do this. And, it was only made possible through the generous gift of a friend of my parents who, really helped finance that trip. And I just remember just being absolutely overwhelmed, being like, oh my goodness, there's such this big world out there. And I was hooked.
I feel that. We traveled in the United States. We would take yearly vacations, but it was usually like revolving around my dad's job, right? Like, so we would,
Mhm.
wherever his conference was that year, we would go on a vacation there and,
Yeah.
spend a few days doing things like that. So it wasn't until I was an adult when I was like, okay, we're going to leave the country. We're going to go somewhere. Where are we going to go? And I ended up in Uganda, of all places, which,
Oh
I
wow.
mean, it was talk about a first experience like, to leave the country. I was like, whoa, there is such a big world and it's so different. And it's amazing and eye opening. And so I love that you had that experience so young because I was in my 30s before I finally left the country.
Oh wow. Yeah. And I mean that's both a blessing and a curse of the
Yes,
American way.
that's true.
We're in one of the world's largest countries, surrounded by the world's two largest oceans, and so there's a kind of isolationism that's built into the fabric of our culture here, which is, on one level, it's great because there's a lot of security to that. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of opportunity. But the downside of it is that, we don't really have an understanding of the rest of the world because we're not connected to it. We're not rubbing shoulders sociopolitically all the time with all these different neighbors. And so, as much as we talk about America being a melting pot, we're more of a salad bowl, we're
Yes.
all, you could pick apart all the different pieces in the different communities because we haven't really truly homogenized, to one, so it's an interesting, there's theories out there you can read about all of that, but yeah, America is such an interesting place, but I love being away from it, and as much as I love being back.
Oh, absolutely. No, 100%. And it's so funny because I love that metaphor that we are not really, we haven't all melded together. But the United States it is so vast because when you talk to people from other countries, they're like, it takes you how long to drive across Texas? Like they're, what? That's wild to them. They don't, and there's cultures of all kinds just in one state. I mean, I'm in Alabama. And so from North to South Alabama, there are different worlds that you enter into. But
Hmm.
there is something to be said for leaving your small little bubble of what you know and experiencing life elsewhere. So, what have you done with those travels? Like, what is it you do now?
So what do I do now? That's always kind of one of those like, I wish I could,
Dang.
I wish I could put a pin in the board and be like, this is the job title. I tell people I help people navigate their cross cultural world.
Mm,
That's the kind of tagline, I guess it is. And really, what that looks like in many different ways is through writing, public speaking, traveling, education. There's a number of different ways that I kind of live that out in my world. And so part of that is through my stories, through my writing. I love to bring the world to people and help them see new perspectives, help open their minds to how life might be in other places. Same thing goes with my public speaking. When I'm presenting, I draw a lot of inspiration from that gentleman I talked about in the opening with the primary school presentations about different cultures. I draw a lot of inspiration from that and kind of help share that onwards, pay that inspiration forwards to others. And then I've spent the last 20 years of my life really living overseas in and around the fringes of traditional education. So either in a classroom teaching or working alongside schools in a paraprofessional kind of manner, outdoor education, socialization, that sort of thing. And then finally, the last piece of that is putting together tours for individuals that really want to engage with the culture on a deep level. And so doing private-led small group tours where you're embedded in with the culture, having meals with local families and staying with them, and of course doing all the touristy things as well and seeing all the sites, but finding new ways to connect with people across borders. At the
mm,
heart of it, what I really find the point of it is that if you can, we have this sense to sort of live in our world where we see us four and no more, right? We've got our own little world that we see things in, and if we're able to sort of drop those barriers for a moment, connect across those boundary lines and see the ways in which we're universally similar, well, now you have a conversation that you can start in order to connect and build relationships. Because at the end of the day, we're social creatures. Even the most introverted person in the world we still want to have a connection. We still want to have a conversation. And so there are ways to do that. And I think it's just learning how you can look past those socio-political, geographical, political boundary lines and make those connections.
yeah, because I think a lot of times we let the media, we let just all the voices around us that are just, they're dissenting on all these points, and they make us think that everybody's out to get us and that they're not human in some form or fashion. But once you embed yourself into their culture, you realize we have a lot more in common than we have opposites. Like we are the same. We are all human. We just approach things differently because whether it is our social or economic or political viewpoints, we all have that single thread running through us that, hello, humanity, And so I can't imagine how eye-opening it has been to move through so many cultures. But was there like a pivotal moment that made you go, I need to share this? Was there a moment in your travels or anything that made you say, I need other people to hear what I have to say?
Yes. So that really comes in the form of the pandemic. So that year, which shall not be named, that we've all sort of had a total pivot to our lives, and found ourselves kind of learning new skills and approaching things, in a virtual world and having our social connections sort of cut, immediately. I found myself in early March of 2020 deciding to take a spring break to a sort of off-grid Greek island. At the time, I was living in Iraq, which of course that raises a whole set of questions, which we can talk about in a minute. But I loved living there. Fantastic place. Most hospitable people I've ever met in the world. And that's living in that culture is really one of those things that helped me recognize that universal humanity aspect. How do you connect? But for all of its great things, it is still an intense place to live. And so in early March of 2020, I decided to take a spring break vacation to this remote Greek island, downshift for a little bit and disconnect. I want to go slightly off grid. I was partway through a master's degree and I was going to do some study and focus. And the day I arrived on this island, the World Health Organization used the words global pandemic. And all the dominoes fell, and what was going to be a 5-day vacation on this Greek island with my carry-on bag extended into 5 long months. And of course, at the time, you had no idea, right? It was just another 2 weeks, let's quarantine another 2 weeks. This will all blow over, right? Well, 5 months into this scenario, I'm still on this Greek island, and I'm wondering what I'm going to do with my life. And it was about midway through those 5 months that I actually discovered there's a refugee camp on the island where I was living, filled with refugees from the Middle East where I was living. And so here I'm a man from the West, caught in Greece, trying to get back to the Middle East, now interacting and connecting with all these Middle Easterners caught in Greece, trying to get to the West. And that whole interaction there, I volunteered to teach English and learned so much about the global migration crisis, about what it means to be a refugee, about just different cultures, about living in Greece, about Greek culture. I don't speak any Greek, but I learned a lot about just being in that space and interacting with these people. And what came out of that entire scenario was my first book, As Large as Your Spirit, which I think, that story was so incredible. Truth is stranger than fiction, right? Yeah. That I had to put it into words, if only for myself. Right. I'm pleased with the reception that it's had, obviously, and it was a laborious process to get that into the world. But it was, that story in and of itself, I think, is the thing that really cemented that concept that I really am meant to share these ideas about connecting with people, with as many people as I can.
I love that. Honestly, if you hadn't experienced it and somebody had told you, this is what happened to me, you would probably look at them and be like, there's no way. Like, that is too much coincidence to have happened that way. But clearly there was a reason, right? And I honestly believe that we are all put in a position to end up with a story that's meant to be shared. Like, I honestly believe that. And so I think that is a fantastic story to share, because it shines the light on so many needs and so many issues that staying at home just on a regular basis, we're never going to see the breadth of it, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so I love that. And that's wild. And how amazing it is that you had that opportunity. And obviously empathy plays this huge role in your work, right? You found that empathy, whether you were an empathetic person before, which you probably were, but I bet it just kind of deepened that whole feeling inside of you. And how do you think that kind of helps shape your work, and even other artists, like finding that empathy? How does it shape their work as well?
Oh, that's a good question, Jen. I think so that empathy side, yes, it really found its way into my work because of having to connect with these refugees on that Greek island. I sort of found myself in this position where I myself was a refugee of sorts. I was stuck away from home. I couldn't get back to where I wanted to be. I had no connection with my friends or family. Internet connection was super poor. I basically was on my own, and I didn't speak any Greek. And I thought maybe I'd accidentally moved to Greece for the rest of my life, right? And of course, the difference was I was coming from a place of privilege. Basically, I had enough finances in the bank to maintain my existence on the island, at least at a very basic level. Managed to negotiate with the hotel owner I was about, local rents and all this sort of thing. But, and I wasn't living the life of a refugee, having been driven out from where I lived or needing to evacuate, although there's another story about that later. But, and I wasn't living under canvas tents or whatever, but I had that same connection. There was that moment of like, I could walk into the classroom and be like, I know how you feel on a human level.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do I know what it's like to have rats climbing all over your tent at night? No, I don't. But I know what it's like to want to go home and to not feel safe, to feel like you need a community and a connection and to find a place to feel like you belong. And so for me, the whole narrative arc of the story is really the concept of what does it mean to find a place to call home, not just physically and geographically, but internally, emotionally, and spiritually. What does it mean to find a home within yourself, who you are, your identity? And so it kind of mirrors those two pathways of that story. And I think the whole, that empathy piece found its way into my work because of that experience. I'm now able to visualize these other characters as I write, or as I share their stories, as I become a conduit for their voices, because so many of these refugees I worked with really have no voice. Mm-hmm. They have no avenue to share their story or to let the world know what it's like to be a refugee. And so through my ability to put these things into words, to share these in my public speaking, or to be in front of a classroom, teaching people about these sorts of things, it enables me to sort of be a conduit for those particular stories and empathize with people who are very different from me, but who share a human, universal, emotional connection.
Oh, I love that. Was there a story, a particular story that stood out to you that it just always comes back to you that you want to share with us?
There's a vignette that's towards the end of the book that really just, it broke my heart. And it's very short in the book, but the real life scenario of it took place over a couple of days and it was very intense. But it was these two young boys who, probably 18 years old, who were in this refugee camp, and they were in my English class. And one night they got pulled back in by the Coast Guard, by the Greek Coast Guard, because they'd been found swimming in the Aegean Sea. And they were pulled back into safety, and when questioned and the whole lot, they claimed that they were trying to swim back to Turkey because the conditions in the refugee camp on the island were so terrible that they thought it was better to go back into where they had come from in Syria. It was their place of origin. They felt it was better for them to go all the way back to Syria than it would be to stay in the refugee camp. Their lives were in danger in Syria, civil war, everything. And they're like, this is better than a refugee camp. Now, the implication behind their entire story really is that it was probably better to sleep at the bottom of the sea than to be in the refugee camp. And these two young boys, I'm very happy to say that they are now doing very well. I'm connected with them through social media. They've been relocated and resettled into Europe and are, doing very well. But it just broke my heart to know that several of my students were stuck in this system, this asylum-seeking system. Some of them are nearly a decade. Wow. Nearly a decade living in these conditions, and it makes my 5 months a blip on the radar. But yeah, totally overwhelming experience.
I can imagine. Did you ever struggle, or do you still struggle with processing those emotions? Because, you think you're that far separated from it. You think that you've had time, but I know for a fact that we had a situation in our life, like back in 2014, that I still am processing. So, let's not invalidate your trauma as well. Does that ever get in the way of your creativity or anything like that?
Man, I think I've learned how to channel it so that it fuels the creativity at this point. I don't know how I've done that. I wish I could tell you. That'd be great. That'd be a great tip.
Like that book. Let me know.
I will say that my creativity was really stunted the year my father passed away in 2012. I had written a whole lot before that, and then the year he died, I ended up putting the pen down, and I didn't write anything for 2 or 3 years. It took me a long time to really process that grief. But since then, I've managed to find avenues and find ways to take that grief and channel it into my creative work. And I think here's the book. It wrapped up in a single sentence. Grief is love that has nowhere to go. And when you are grieving, if you can find a new channel for that love, i.e. your art, then you have a depth of experience that you can share that will end up being so much richer than you ever believed.
That is so true. I was literally having a conversation with somebody the other day that we were supposed to have a conversation here, and she emailed me and she was like, my grandfather died and I'm still, I break down into these tears and I can't stop crying. And I said, hey, you embrace that grief, like embrace it, because one, it's there to serve as a reminder, but eventually that grief is also going to remind you how strong you are and that there is something better yet to come. Not that, life wasn't great and grand when your grandfather was there, but just think of all the ways that he's influenced you to be the person you are today. Like that grief is going to serve a purpose at some point if you will let it. So yeah. I do agree that letting grief fuel your creativity, that is such a form of resilience that we don't really see, and I get it. There are some of us who don't process things as well, but if you'll find an outlet for it, you will find yourself finding the other side a lot faster.
Yeah, no, I definitely think so. And I mean, to sort of put that into a context, my current grief cycle, to be raw and open and vulnerable here, is I was evacuated from Iraq in October. So this is only 7 months ago now. And that was a complete surprise to me. I didn't expect that. I'd lived there for 7 years. 7 years of my life, I had lived in Iraq. I loved it, built a community, was in high standing in the school where I worked, and had meetings with ministers of education in the region, and had given talks all up and down the country through Baghdad and up in there, in the Kurdistan region where I was. And I was on a Thursday night out with friends, hanging out, having drinks, just having a good time. And on a Friday night, I had a phone call from the State Department. They said, you need to go as soon as possible. And by Saturday night, my whole life, I'd packed up in 2 suitcases and fled, knowing that I would never be able to come back.
Oh my gosh.
So, I mean, that was such an incredibly traumatic experience. And granted, it's still taking me time to unpack that. But, a good 2 months at least of really processing, of just being with myself and thinking through all those issues before I was able to start picking up a pen and even start processing in writing and words some of that. So what I'm currently working on, my current project, Between Iraq and a Hard Place, is
awesome.
is it kind of, I know, right? It's the story of my evacuation, but it's interlaced with basically a love letter to Iraq on my life there and the culture and how beautiful a place it really is.
I think that is amazing. I mean, not just the title. I mean, that is fantastic, like chef's kiss. But the whole concept, because a loss is a loss, right? Like there is nothing to say that your experience is not something that you should grieve, because it absolutely is. And nobody else has a right to judge that. And that goes for anybody who's listening. Like, just because somebody else doesn't see what you're dealing with as a loss, it's yours. Embrace it, right? And process it as you need to. And it doesn't matter what anybody else says. That's just my 2 cents on that matter. But yeah, to be able to say, I am grieving and I still love, that's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that is a fantastic way, especially for creatives, because we are emotional people, and sometimes a little more emotional than non-creative people. Mm-hmm. And so our emotions can take control of us really quickly if we don't focus them somewhere. It's kind of like one of those, the generators that if they don't let off the energy, then they're going to shut down, like a nuclear situation. Mm-hmm. So yeah, no, we creatives are nuclear sometimes.
Yeah, we can be.
We can be. Absolutely. Were there like when you ventured into Iraq, when you were there and you were, finding your way, what were some of the biggest adjustments you had to make living there?
On a practical level, I mean, one of the first things that really took me by surprise and took me some time to get used to was the cash-only society.
Ooh.
When I arrived, there were virtually no banks to speak of. No cards, nobody had a credit card. I mean, it's a bank card. You have a debit card. Like, it is cash only for everything. You pay your rent, you pay your phone bill, you pay the internet bill, you pay everything in cash. And so people literally just have rooms full of cash in their house that, you just keep locked up, and that's your own personal private bank of money. And so that took me a while to get used to, having just cash. Now to the point where it's really weird for me to come back here and be like, I can pay for everything with this little piece of plastic. Like, what? Like, how do I know? How do I know? What I'm spending? Like, I mean, it's almost dangerous.
Yeah.
I kind of like the cash idea because it's like, okay, like once the cash is gone, the money's gone. But that took a little bit of an adjustment there. But I'd lived overseas by that point a good 15 years of my life or so, and so there wasn't a lot that really took me by surprise. It was just all the little minor adjustments, the little tiny things that you have to do in order to make ends meet and to figure out your way, navigate your way through that culture. And I tell people frequently that living in another culture feels a little bit like walking into the cinema halfway through a movie and being doomed to never see the beginning. In that you'll see the end of the movie, you can guess what the first half is about, your friends will whisper it to you quietly, you might go home and read the book, but you'll never actually see the first hour of that film for yourself. And so that's a little bit what it's like living in a different culture, is you're stepping into it partway through, and you have no idea what it was like to go to primary school in this country, or what it was like to have your mom, make you the local equivalent of chicken soup when you were sick or whatever. Like, you just don't know those things. And yet, from the moment you set foot in the culture forward, you are part of the story and part of the conversation, and you get to grow with the culture in that way. And so it's super fun to, it is a little bit of a detective kind of thing. It's like, okay, I got to try and figure out what this first half was about, so I don't stick out. Like, I want to be able to talk to people about their daily lives. And if I don't know what the first half of the movie's about, then I'm not going to get the ending. And so it's a lot of fun for me. I think that's the excitement in living in a different culture.
I agree. And that is a fantastic analogy, because we spent 6 weeks in the Dominican Republic, and we were there for an adoption, and that's a whole nother trauma that we're not going to unpack on today's show. But things happened. We ended up empty-handed after 3 weeks, but had to spend the rest of the 6 weeks in this country where my Spanish was high school level, and I was doing pretty good, and the internet didn't work, so translating stuff was complicated. My husband, on the other hand, had a better background in Spanish. He had been learning it, and he was much better at it. But I am more Dominican looking, apparently, than my very white, freckled, redheaded husband. And so they would look at me and start talking, and I was like, no comprendo, talk to him. And they're like, leche? And they would call him leche, because he's so white. They were like, milk? And I'm like, yeah, talk to him. He knows more than I do. But yeah, that is so true, because you walk in and you're like, I have no idea what's going on. They assume I know what's going on, and they could ask me a question, and I have no idea what's going on. But by the end of those 6 weeks, I was ready to figure out how to move there and live there permanently, because I loved the love of the culture. I loved the people of the culture. We still have friends down there, and we even had some American friends that were down there that we were just like, what are you doing here? So it was just it's such an experience. And I think everybody should be forced to go live in another country for at least a month.
It is such an eye-opening and growth-inducing experience. It really is.
It is. And the first time that we had to tip the parking lot attendant holding a very large gun because he was going to make sure nobody broke into our car, you're like, what? Okay, take all my money. Don't let anybody break into my rental car. Like I can't speak Spanish well enough to get my car back. And so, or now we still drive in a way that we say, we're going to pull a Dominican and we're going to drive very Dominican because it's a very different kind of aggressive driving. They're just parts that fed into our souls and that just were like, I would pay somebody to guard my car in a parking lot now, whether that gun is loaded or not. Yeah, please guard my car. We miss some things from that.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of living in different places, that you end up adopting different parts of the culture into your own life. It becomes just second nature. I mean, I remember just the other day, I'm driving back home, and seatbelts are not a thing in Iraq. I mean, you don't wear a seatbelt, and it's just not a thing. You should wear a seatbelt, all of you listening, but in Iraq, they just don't. And so I kind of got in the habit of, I would put on my seatbelt, and people would be like, oh, American, But we drive around, and then whenever we would get near to the destination, like you'd see the destination a mile ahead or at the end of the block or whatever it is, people would just go ahead and unbuckle their seatbelt for that last mile of the journey, half mile, 200 yards, whatever it was. And I remember just the other day, I'm here in Kansas City and I'm driving home someplace, and I see my home around the corner, and I'm like still a half mile away. I'm like, unclick my seatbelt, and just kept driving through the school zone.
Where there's probably a policeman waiting.
If you're listening, please don't arrest me.
That was the other Joel. It wasn't him.
But it's those little things, there's those little sort of nervous ticks and those everyday bits of culture that you kind of just sink into your soul someplace. And all of a sudden it's incorporated, written into your DNA for a while of your life. And you're like, this is such a fascinating thing that I've learned.
Yes, and I want to go back because I don't want to forget. It's been 10 years and it's still so vivid in my mind, and I hope it always is. I spent 2 weeks in Uganda, and I can still see vividly in my mind the smiles on the little kids' faces. They're just always everybody's so happy, so just welcoming and loving, and they had to work for everything. They had to work so hard. And I hope that never leaves me. I really do hope that. But I also hope other people get to experience that. And so with that, is there anywhere else you plan to go anytime soon?
Yes. The big news is that I've just accepted a teaching position in the Ivory Coast in West Africa.
Wow.
So I'll be moving there in August to start a new season of my life, a new adventure there.
Oh, that's exciting. So do you teach English? What do you teach?
So I'll be teaching English literature at a French international school. So I'm very excited for that opportunity because I do speak French. I actually majored in it in college, my undergrad. And so 20 years later, give me a chance to actually use it.
Hopefully it hasn't changed or anything.
I know it's a little rusty, although I have maintained over the years. I do make an effort to read at least one book in French every year. A novel, and I'll frequently listen to a podcast series in French, and I've had French friends wherever I've lived, so I've been able to maintain at least the basics, and it'll all come back to me, I'm sure. But I'm very excited to go and live in this francophone country, to experience a new continent that I've yet to live on. I have traveled to South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, which is the neighbor to Côte d'Ivoire. So. But it's the new adventure, so we're going to have to learn a whole lot of things. I have to learn what it's like to take malaria medication on a regular basis. Yeah,
A whole new world. Yeah,
indeed.
I love that. No, I'm excited for you. And then you'll have to come back and we'll have to live vicariously through you on that one as well, because that is so exciting. Is there like a dream place that if you could go and live that you would go?
I don't know if there's a dream place. I do have this sort of internal desire to live on every continent before I die. So Africa will be number 4. So I think next on my bucket list would be South America someplace. I would love to live in Peru or Ecuador or Brazil. I've thought about Argentina for a while. I've looked at things like that. I'm a dual citizen with the UK, so there's potential for like the Falkland Islands perhaps as an option, and so there's there are options that are there that I would love to pursue. A couple of years ago I applied to work at the world's most southernmost post office in Antarctica, which employs 4 people for 6 months out of the year, and it's just a short 6-month contract and then you're done, but you live on this tiny island off the coast of Antarctica, and the cruise ships stop in, and you postmark all their mail and send it onward. Yeah. So
ask, like, are the penguins sending mail? Like, where are we going with this? But okay,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. It's mostly the cruise ships that come in,
Okay.
and for the novelty. It's actually an old. It's not Shackleton, but it's that era of explorers that had built this base, and so now it's maintained by the UK National Trust as a World Heritage Site, basically. And so you go and you live in this, remote old Victorian scientific station on this island and count the penguins mostly. But I had applied for that. That was my one wish to live in Antarctica for a short while, and then that one didn't come to fruition. So I'll try again another time, perhaps.
Yeah, no, that would be wild. The things I didn't know existed. That's amazing. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's so funny.
Hashtag goals.
I like it, and that's something that, like, if it happens, you need to email me immediately because I'm invested in this story now. Okay, we're at the point of the show where we're going to flip the script, and you are now the host of Connected Conversations for Creatives, and I am the guest, so the show is yours.
Well, you had talked a lot about empathy and resilience in your questioning to me, and I'd like to flip that script for you.
Okay.
Because you have let drop throughout the conversation today about counseling, about therapy, and having some training and background in that. And then you alluded to a conversation for another time about adoption and sort of bringing, all of those I think are really connected in terms of what empathy and resilience are. And so from someone in a mental health background who's got some training in that, how has that made its way into your work and your writing?
Yeah, so I was a marriage and family counselor. That's what I went to grad school for and all that good stuff, and used it for a little while. And but I also taught AP psychology, which I much preferred because those kids have to do what you say, whereas when you're counseling, yeah, it's a different story. I will say that I was not always a person who had a whole lot of empathy, mostly because I think my worldview was so narrow, right? Like I did not have that, the ability to relate to a bunch of different kinds of people on a different level. I grew up in Gulf Shores, Alabama, which is an island in Alabama, off Alabama kind of thing. And it's a very monotone and culturally, physically, all of that. Even the sand is white. I'm not saying that it was 100% that way, but it was everybody lived in this bubble in an island mentality, a wealthy island mentality. And I loved growing up there because I loved the beach and it's all I knew. It was my childhood. And I think once I started moving beyond that, I started realizing, there's, like we have said, a whole different world out there. And so it took me, I was definitely an adult when I realized that I was very narrow-minded. And so being able to see other people struggle and to understand that I had to understand myself first, like you have to understand that your struggles are a thing. And sometimes that comes through watching other people and helping them through their struggles. When you come to this realization, that's how you process things healthily. That's what it is. And so how does that affect my writing? It does allow me to write better characters, more realistic characters. I'm not writing female characters who, just get trampled. I'm not writing male characters who are alpha and constantly demanding. I'm not, I can see there's a balance there of what's healthy, how to work through things. And so that does affect my writing because I refuse to write unhealthy relationships for people to see and be like, this is normal, having that worldview expand a little bit and understand that there's a right and a wrong way to a lot of things. It's impacted my writing a lot, actually.
Wow. Yeah. So what is your main genre that you drift towards? So, I think all of us as creatives tend to dabble in lots of different things. I've dabbled in poetry and fiction and short form and everything. And I've kind of landed on memoir really as my particular space of preference. What's your space of preference?
My first two books are in the Christian fiction genre, but I also have an urban fantasy that I really want to get back to because I love it. Like, I love the story where I was going with it, but then I got distracted by these characters who wanted me to write their story because that's how it happens in my head. The characters pop up and say, "Hey, there's a story here."
Hmm.
So at the moment, I'm in a contemporary romance series that I'm writing, and hopefully after I'm done with that series. Right now it's looking like an 8-book series just based on how I have it planned out. So
Yeah.
it might be a minute, but then I want to go back to my urban fantasy because
Okay.
I'm really highly invested in it.
All right. So, well, this brings me to what you just dropped a line there that I really wanted to follow up on. Do you consider yourself a planner or a fly by the seat of your pantser? The planner or a pantser?
I am okay. So as far as like when I start writing a book, it's because characters showed up. For instance, in my most recent book, Fall When You're Ready, the characters showed up when I was listening to a song, and they said, "Hey, this is our song. Now write our story." And I was like, "Okay, great. We can make that happen." Um, and I knew exactly how the story was going to go as soon as they came into my head,
Hmm.
and so I've word vomit like this one big document of like a very detailed summary, but after that, I have no idea what's going to happen until I start writing.
Okay.
So it's like a plantser, but more pantser than plotter.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do know like the characters because the series revolves around like these main 12 characters who are in a reality television show singing competition. And so I know who the characters already are.
Hmm.
And so that's why I know that there are at least this many books in the future. So,
Yeah.
but I don't know what's going to happen yet.
Fantastic.
It's a
Love it.
surprise to
Good
everybody.
stuff.
Yeah. Well, thanks for hosting our show today. I am going to take the reins back so I can ask, how can listeners connect with you? How can they get in touch with you, follow you, find your work?
Hmm. So I'm everywhere on the internet at Joel David Bond. My website, joeldavidbond.com, and then Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook are my main socials at Joel David Bond. And then my book, As Large as Your Spirit, a reverse refugee memoir, is available globally on Amazon.
Awesome. Now, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit. You self-published all of your work so far? Is that the
Yes.
plan from now on?
So I've done self-publishing for the first book. I'll probably self-publish the second as well. I've just found traditional publishing at this point it's such a niche market to break into, and to me, at the end of the day, it's not whether or not I have a traditional publishing house; it's whether or not I actually get to share the story with people who are going to pick it up. So
Yes, absolutely. I love that because I'm the same way. Like, I'm not going to sit here and wait for them to tell me if my book is worth putting out there. I know my book is worth putting out there, and so we're going to put it out there because the people who need the story, they're going to find it. They
yeah,
are.
yeah, that's a little bit how. I mean, I'd love traditional publishing if I could, but
Sure.
if you're out there listening to me, editor somewhere, go check out my book and tell me whether or not you think it's good. But but for now, it's out there in the
Yeah.
world, and it's had really good reception, and I'm really pleased with it. And go buy a copy, read it, and see what you think.
Yes, absolutely. All right, Joel, I have one final question. It is the big question. Are you ready for the big question?
Do it.
All right. What is one piece of advice or encouragement you want someone to walk away with if they hear nothing else?
We ask ourselves all the time, what if? And finish that sentence with a negative. What if it's terrible? What if I lose my money? What if these friends walk away from me? What if it all falls apart? What if fill in the blank? And my encouragement to anybody who's at a life juncture, following a creative endeavor, whatever it is, where you have something in front of you that you're having to make a decision and you're afraid to make the decision, try asking the what if and fill in the positive. What if you love it? What if it's amazing? What if it brings you more joy than you ever knew possible? What if these people change your life in a way that you never dreamed possible for the good?
Mm.
And I think it's useful to balance both sides of the what if, but we so often forget the positive. And so anyone who's out there pursuing a creative endeavor, you're looking at your next project, you're at a life juncture, what if it turns out amazing? Then go and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you will not know the answer to that question until you take the next step and actually try. Like there's no way to answer that question because what ifs are so just vague and out
Hmm.
there. So, yeah, that is the best advice I think I could hear today. So, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and all the listeners out there who are just looking for an answer. I think you just gave it to them. They have to find that answer for themselves.
Yeah. You got the tools. Now go and use them.
That's exactly right. Well, Joel, thanks for being here today and for having this conversation. It's one that, it could have this tendency to be a little depressing, but it's not. Like it's very uplifting and inspiring because you took the negative, you turned it to a positive, and I think you're thriving because of it.
I think I had someone the other day was they were talking about a similar scenario, and I said, you know what, you end up being able to provide strength to others born out of your own broken weakness.
Mm.
And that's it. Whatever your tragic experience, whatever your trauma, whatever your difficult scenario that you've had to face in life, born out of that will be your greatest strength. And so, what if? It's great. Just do it.
I love that. Thank you.